Welcome to A Cult of Personality, esoteric podcast extraordinaire. I'm your host, Greg Kaminsky. In episode number 211, we're joined again by our good friend, spiritual practitioner, martial artist, and author Craig Williams to discuss his recent book, Tantric Physics I II, from Anathema Publishing Limited. A Cult of Personality podcast is made possible by you, the listeners, and by the subscribers to chamberofreflection.com, our membership site who aids us in the cause of informed, authentic, and accessible interviews about Western esotericism. Thank you again. Because of your support, we're able to bring you recordings of this caliber and many more to come. Anathema Publishing Limited. Quality occult books and contemporary esoterica. Established in 2011, Anathema Publishing aims to provide superior literature in content and form by creating a trinosophic relationship in troth and gabo between publisher, author, and reader. Anathema Publishing produces refined books for the true bibliophile on topics ranging from Gnosticism, traditional craft, alchemy, Hermeticism, witchcraft, to Luciferian theosophy. www.anathemapublishing.com. Now, in episode number 211, Craig Williams returns to the show to talk about his wonderful book, Tantric Physics, specifically Volume 2, Sacred Body, Sacred Space. You can find Craig online at ayurvedaaustin.com. I want to take a moment to reminisce about how I've known Craig personally for 9 years. Since the day I met him, he's been honorable, straightforward, honest, smart, talented, inspiring, and has had the most intense focus on advancing his spiritual path of almost anyone I've ever known. Craig's writing and talks inspire his readers and listeners to learn and grow and become better people. I'm honored and proud to call Craig my friend. I am also thrilled that he joined us here to discuss Tantra and his book, which is an absolutely amazing 2-volume in one. It's one of the best books on the subject that I've read. Whatever your spiritual path, Craig's work is beneficial because he is describing authentic esoteric view and methods that are designed to and do produce gnosis as the result. I highly recommend Tantric Physics I and II. The intro music is Awakening by Paul Adjerinos, and the outro music is Diana Nemorensis by Numinous Vibes. Now, I just want to take a moment to let you know, which I would usually do at the end of the interview, but I'm going to do it again then. But I have to say that in the second half of this interview that's in the Chamber of Reflection, Craig and I continue this discussion, and we dive very, very deeply into an exploration of gnosis, Gnostic bliss, birth and death, and much more. And in all my years of recording this podcast, few interviews have resulted in a more in-depth analysis and discussion that goes straight to the heart. So I hope you enjoy this first part as much as we did, and I hope you join us for the second part in the Chamber of Reflection. Thank you. I want to welcome you back to A Cult of Personality, Craig Williams. It's always great to speak with you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Greg, it's an honor to be on. I'm always so thankful to be on your show, and I'm excited for what we're going to talk about.
So am I. Before we begin, I just want to take a moment to say that I always love talking with you. You may have been interviewed on A Cult of Personality more than any other single guest. I'm pretty certain that's the case. And I feel like every time I speak with you, I don't just learn one new thing, I learn many new things, and I gain a greater appreciation for esoteric spirituality in general. I've always appreciated the way you approach your study and practice and work. You have a tremendous amount of discipline, and you're a huge inspiration to me, and I know many other people out there. And I mean, since I met you in 2012, every time that we've had any interaction, I've come away feeling completely uplifted and inspired and amazed at the way that you are so dedicated to what you do, and that dedication pays off in so many ways. So I really appreciate that, and I just wanted to mention that, because I feel like what we're about to talk about is in many ways like a crowning achievement. Not to say that you're done or anything, but what you've written here is really tremendous, and I'm excited to discuss it with you.
I'm totally honored by your words, and I'm just so grateful for your interesting questions. And so I think that always stimulates our discussion. And so, and I think what we can discuss tonight, I think that you are right about this being something that I feel like I've accomplished, and I'm ready to be happy with that. So we can discuss that too.
Excellent. So the reason for our interview right at the moment is your recent book, Tantric Physics Vol.2, Sacred Body, Sacred Space, published by Anathema Publishing Limited. And I have to say, this is just like, I've loved every one of your books, but this one has a really special place in my heart. I love the way that it's published with volume 1 of the book. As like, it's a great to revisit that and then to go into the new section. To me, as I mentioned before we started this, what you've written here is, to me, like the best exposition on Tantra I've ever encountered, outside of like an oral teaching from my teacher. And to me, like, that's the highest praise I could possibly give a book. And the reason I feel that way is as I said, because the book actually gives the reader a taste of what is actually happening, as opposed to explanations or academic expositions on what is Tantra and what is the sadhana and what is, very like dry, structured. What you've provided here goes like deep into the heart of the very practice of Tantra and its results. And I can't say enough good things, but maybe you could give us some insight into how you developed the idea for what you were going to present and the way that you did it.
I appreciate that feedback. And that's a really interesting comment that you make about it feeling like an oral exposition, because that's really what I wanted it to feel like. I was adamant that this book would not just be another dry textbook on Tantra or yoga or Ayurveda. There's a million books about all that out there, and there's some really phenomenal books about that. And I remember being in the academic world, studying religious studies and being very unhappy with that writing style. It was something that just didn't really inspire me. So, 40 years later, 35 years later, when I write this, I wanted it to be something that would be alive with a vibrancy of the oral tradition. And so to hear that feedback from you as a practitioner is incredibly rewarding. And I also didn't want it to be a book that had endless definitions and explanations. I just wanted it to be as if someone was just transported into a room where a discussion was happening, or even another dimension where a discussion was happening, and they could kind of take something from that, taste what they can, because a lot of it has to do with what they can taste, right? How it, what is their palate like? Are they able to absorb certain things? So each time a reader can go to this book, hopefully they can find something different, find something more. And I also wanted a large part of it to be expressed in poetic writing, which is kind of a nod to the Vedas, the Rig Veda, the Atharva Veda, these texts which were written in a poetic language, which had many 4 to 5, 6 different levels of meaning. And so I hopefully achieved that as well. So those are in my my mind when I was writing this. And I really wanted the first volume to be included because that Cave of the Numinous Tantric Physics Volume 1 has long been sold out and just had horrible prices on eBay and things. And I think that's very unfair. And so I wanted that book to be reissued in a more authentic presentation, and then to have them together, I think, is a nice kind of type of vibrancy that they tie together in the sequence. And then I also wanted, I remember writing a little bit in the book, I wanted it to be a type of a journey, so that the volume 1 was kind of the outer part of the temple. And then as you move into volume 2, Sacred Body, Sacred Space, that was going into the actual doorway to the inner chambers of the temple. And so things change, right? When you're on the exterior of the temple, there's one level of perception, but as you go deeper, the consciousness will change, the perceptions will change.
Certainly.
So hopefully that comes through when people read the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to tell you, as a person that practices Tantra myself, maybe not the same specific version, but a version certainly, I had great appreciation for what you wrote. And then, even as my own practice develops, like my appreciation for it grew. And there were, different aspects that seemed emphasized at different times. It was just beautiful because it's almost like a very dynamic, living text in that sense.
That was my vision, and I'm glad to hear your feedback as a practitioner from that. And I did hope that, we mentioned the idea of the rasa, or the taste of that someone was going to be able to taste this and extract something from this. And then regardless of what style of Tantra they were practicing. Obviously, when one looks through this book, it's clear that this has a Hindu tint to it, but the Tantric tradition, runs much beyond any kind of minuscule sectarian disputes.
Absolutely.
And I tried to show that in the book too. I wanted people to see that this is not just one small, branch of Tantra that only argues one. I tried to show with them that there was a vast, array of doorways within this world. And to use an overused word, that it does have a quantum aspect to it, that depending on how you look at the Tantric world, it can morph and change based on the adhikara, or the readiness of the practitioner, or the perception of the practitioner.
Oh, absolutely. It's completely dependent on that in many ways, I think. Boy, that's really a fascinating concept.
And then if people have their own, deity or their own lineage that they are connected to, particularly if it was a Hindu, then they could easily find doorways within this text to where they could expand within their own practice. But even if someone was a Tibetan Tantric practitioner, they would see doorways within this book as well.
Oh, most definitely. And in many ways, authentic Dharma teachings or Tantric teachings, I find to be like a holographic, in the sense that no matter at which point or node you enter into it, it inevitably leads you to the totality.
Yes, that's an incredibly important concept. And that was actually the inspiration, the initial inspiration for me to call these texts Tantric Physics. That was the idea, that there's a holographic experience when one does that. And even within the Dasha Mahavidyas, the wisdom goddess tradition, becomes quickly apparent that depending on what viewpoint that the person has, the goddess reveals herself in a different way.
Yeah.
And that's also in the Vedas as well too. The deities morph in and out of each other in very mysterious ways.
That is a fascinating aspect of it. One thing I wanted to ask you about is this sort of notion that you mention in the introduction about the corporeal as a field of human experience. I mean, this is so crucial, and yet we find, especially within the Western esoteric traditions, what I've come to see as like a very Gnostic dualism where, there's almost a contempt for physicality and the body and the experience of enworldment.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I mean, there's definitely, we could almost call it like a type of philosophical verticalism, right? What that viewpoint or the old viewpoint would be that the body is just like a breeding ground for karma, and it's a prison, and it's locking you into samsara, and that we long to escape this body in this prison. And that is an aspect of it when you read some yogic and tantric text, but it's a very myopic viewpoint. And if you're not informed with a larger tradition, you can really kind of miss the whole concept. Is that, yes, we want to kind of transform and always progress in our spiritual practice, but we don't quickly want to escape the body, particularly if we are incarnated, because number one, it's very rare to get a human body from this perspective. And then it's even more rare to get a human body that's healthy and that we can exist in a dimension where we are able to study the Dharma through teachers and through practitioners and through lineages. All that is so rare, and it's such a rare experience that provides a very unique opportunity for us to live out our karma, to transform our karma. And then from a tantric perspective, we really can embrace that. We want to see that the body is a mirror, a holographic mirror of the universe, that we don't have to seek to escape it. We can actually see the corporeal as the flesh as a doorway. The flesh is a sacred space. Then, to use a more Gnostic term, it becomes a sacrament, right? That we could even talk about it in that perspective as well. And I wonder too, I think that people, I don't know if they realize it or not, but even people from Eastern perspectives who denigrate the physical body, sometimes I think they feel as if they're trying to, leave this limited realm of disgusting passions and disappointments and suffering and go on to this other dimension. But from a tantric perspective, this whole world is made up of a goddess. It's Prakriti, it's Mahamaya. This is even embracing the physicality of the world is a type of worship of the goddess, of the feminine. And so I often wonder sometimes when we see people denigrating the body and wanting to escape from it, is there some kind of weird subtext of the fear of the feminine, even within that? Even if they don't realize it.
Yeah. I mean, how would it even be possible to obtain wisdom or gnosis without a human body? I mean, as far as I'm aware, that is for us the only way to do it, is through the body.
Right. I think so too. And that was even the whole basic concept of Ayurvedic medicine, was that it was seeking to balance the physical body so that it could become the best expression or the best environment to maximize one's expression of their karma. And that would be how we would live out our dharma. And so if that's not happening, then we're stuck, or it's kind of like it's almost like Groundhog Day. Then you just return back and try it again, This is from an Eastern perspective. Some people might not take that angle, but from a tantric perspective, we want to embrace any chance we have in a physical body. And also we see this even in the scriptures. The deities want the physical body too. That's why they have avatars. They incarnate. They want to come down here and experience that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think from many traditions, there's this notion, certainly from Western esoteric that the human is in a unique position in that we sort of a mediator,
Yes.
or you could say it's a middling realm, depending on your perspective, but that we have the capability, if we really work and apply ourselves and are fortunate and blessed, to reach even greater heights than angels. At least that's what I've been told.
I would agree, and many of the tantric texts talk about that, and specifically many of the agora practices are all about this. That seeking to find that spark of Agni, that spark of the Atman in every single expression on Earth, regardless of how dirty it looks, how frightening it looks, how disturbing it looks, or how beautiful it looks. That the agora was seeking to find that and extract that. And that's a key part of my book, and is that how can we extract this rasa from life, from these different experiences?
Yeah,
and to do that, it's a key point of that text.
Definitely. Could you mention, the ways or the methods that you talk about in the text you engage in order to bring that awareness into reality?
Yeah, I mean, there's different tantric traditions, have different perspectives on that. The traditions that I were initiated into and studied with were definitely, although some might be called Vamacharya, left-hand path, some would be called or are called the Agora path. And then from the outside perspective, it seems very controversial or maybe very dark or strange. But from the inside view, once again, we're back talking this holographic language, right?
Yes.
We have to use these strange spatial concepts, verticalism, horizontal, inside, outside, to describe something which is really just it's encompassing everything. We're already in it. It's like a womb. But regardless, we have to just try to describe it. And so from the agoric perspective, once you're in it, everything is the divine.
Yes.
Everything is beauty.
Yes.
And so the whole thing, and so once that happens, then every human experience can become sacred. Joy, sadness, anger, fear, lust, passion, compassion, generosity. All those things have a certain rasa to it, and we can extract that. And as we extract these experiences, and if we're able to extract something it produces a certain type of substance in the body, which from an Ayurvedic perspective, we would call ojas. And that is a type of rejuvenating factor that allows our body to transmute things. We're seeking to have certain internal secretions in the body, and that can also transform our consciousness. And then when that happens, we can start to have radically different perspectives on life. We can see trends in our karma. And then we're able to kind of dive deeper into our practices. Obviously, this includes all the limbs of yoga, the practice of Jyotish or Vedic astrology, definitely the practice of Ayurvedic medicine, and it's very specific alchemy practices called, Rasayana.
Mm-hmm.
With certain substances can be used and transformed. But those are all kind of like glamorous things, and people kind of can get caught up into that. But what it really comes down to is our perspective of life, our perspective of the human incarnation, and what is its role. Because you can take the most fancy Ayurvedic alchemical bhasmas, or you can do the most special mantras, but if you don't have the right perspective, they're dead. It's like,
Yeah.
And that's that saying, like Shiva without Shakti is Shabda. Shiva without the Shakti is a corpse. And
yeah,
so,
without
that there. And I often say Shiva without Bhakti is a corpse.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, without the proper view, the methods don't work
at all. And so that's a big thing that I'm always trying to, and I hope even in my book that there are techniques, there are things mentioned in there, but it's not an instruction manual,
right,
per se. It's more an experiential. It's a chance for someone to get a glimpse into a tantric worldview. But although it does have rituals, it does have much deeper aspects than that. So there are keys in there that if people were studying, they could take if they had a teacher they could go to with questions, and it would definitely stimulate some interesting discussions. So that does exist within that, you know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just bursting forth with that sort of content. One thing I really liked is the way you wrote about this idea of sacrifice, which can take many forms, of course, but I don't think many people who haven't experienced the rigors of a tantric path, and not to brag, because it's not really something worth doing, but there is a tremendous amount of sacrifice that is entailed just for in terms of the practitioner, at least from that perspective, as a one who may be starting out on the path, or because typically people approach the spiritual path with this notion about, I want to change, I want to grow, I want
Yes.
to become the special being, or I want to
Right.
become enlightened. But really, the spiritual path, it's not about you or me, it's about the divine. And so
Right.
immediately you're presented with the fact that you have to give up your notions of specialness, or that you're going to like somehow be anything special or different or unique or recognized. And then you're even presented further with the fact that you may have sacrificed like some degree of your identity. Okay, big deal. But think about what the divine has already sacrificed before you even, step foot here.
Right. Yeah, it's a radical concept, and I think that sometimes that's one of the missing links that people really always seem to forget, or they evade, whether unconsciously or consciously, is that to pursue the tantric path, to pursue a yogic path requires a radical reorientation of one's perception of reality and one's perception of one's role in the world. But to pursue a tantric path, it not only does it have a radical reorientation. Once you reorientate, then it's going to have a radical deconstruction, and then it's going to have a radical sacrificial pyre on which these things happen. So it's many different levels of that. And it does require a lot of things giving up. And a lot of people might not understand that because they thought we were just talking about, no, we're not seeking to escape something. But the point is many people have things in their lives that start to become buffers to their spiritual self-realization. And that's the problem, right? People, whether it's a family, a job, desires, it forms a wall around their ability to see the solar sun of the Atman for it to shine through. From the tantric perspective, we want to burn down all those walls and truly embrace the human experience without anything holding us back. And so for each person, that could be different, right? That's why the tantric practices were always unique. Each practitioner was given maybe different instructions, although it might exist within a particular lineage. But it definitely demanded more of someone, even if on the surface, the person's life seemed regular. On the inner experience of that person, they were experiencing a completely different radical perception of reality. And I think that's an important concept for people to see. And it sometimes comes through as a warning, right? This is why we see warnings in many of the tantric texts. A lot of people perceive that as a type of spiritual elitism, or some type of kind of like old school kind of, think from an old world view where people were superstitious, and now we've evolved to a higher state. We know that's not true anymore. And that's, almost what I would refer to use a or Western esoteric term, that's a very Ahrimanic worldview of that, right? It tries to really kind of desacralize everything and make everything into this mechanistic, rational universe. And we have to start to clear our minds so that we can see that. And that can be very frightening for some people. And it definitely, once you experience that, once you see some of these things and have some of these experiences, it's very hard for them to go back to quote regular reality, and that can be shocking to some. That can cause psychological problems, nervous system disorders, or just basic unhappiness and depression, which is still a problem, and so I think the idea of sacrifice and what one is willing to give up for their spiritual practices is a very sobering conversation that they should have. And I say this a lot because it can get very frustrating for me, because I get this question constantly, is that how can I find a guru, right? And I understand that's part of what people will ask, because I've written extensively about that. But part of the thing is, and I go over, I say, well, before you find a guru, you have to be even ready to be a student, and that's a big part. But also, even before you find a guru, people have to understand when they do encounter that guru, what's going to happen. There's going to be a combustion there, and that in Vedic astrology, whatever house Surya or the sun is in, we call that it's combustion. And the Surya or the sun is considered a malefic, which is very mysterious, right? The sun is supposed to be beautiful. It's a symbol of prana. It's the cosmic symbol of the Atman. It gives life to all of us. Every cell in our body has a receptor. So when it encounters solar radiations, it can make vitamin D, which keeps us alive. But Vedic astrology says, well, regardless, it's a malefic. What they mean is that whatever house that's the sun is, it's going to just combust and burn away anything that's not important, or anything that's not truly essential for that person's transformation and growth. And that can be intense, because most people they think what they want is real. They think what they want is the most important thing, but often that's not the case.
Yeah, almost always.
Almost always, right. And then so the guru is like that sun. The guru is there it causes combustion. And a lot of people aren't ready for that. That's a very controversial subject, and I have many people that get very mad at me and angry at me for saying that someone needs a guru, and it's fine. Everyone can take any path they want, but that the whole idea of that solar combustion.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so many things I had to say in response to that, so I'm going to limit myself. But
go for it.
Okay, one of them is, my teacher always says, this is the path of giving up everything and getting nothing in return.
Yes.
And I said recently to somebody, and I think it is a crude summation of some of what you just said, that the spiritual path will fuck you up. And if you don't absolutely have to get on it, you should avoid it at all costs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really well said. I like that.
And what else? I love the way Nisargadatta said that liberation is never of the person, it's only ever from the person.
Right.
So you have to understand, like, people get upset about the fact they need a guru. Well, that's good, because if you actually were a student or a disciple of the guru, it would be way more intense, and you'd be experiencing a lot of wrath.
Right. It's very similar to, people are always like, oh, I want to worship Kali, or I want to worship Bhairavi, or I want to worship Dhumavati. And that they don't understand what that entails. Like when you kind of address that level of consciousness to the human experience, it can be radically disorienting and radical. It's very challenging. And so I think they have to be ready for that, and that's where the warnings come from. That's what your teacher's talking about. So much, although it's not, it dwarfs it. There is many similarities in martial arts lineages about like receiving the Sifu title, like the amount of sacrifices that someone has to make to receive that title is just ridiculous. No one should do that. When anyone asks me, should I do that to pursue that, 99% of the time, I say just what you said. Absolutely no. It's going to ruin your life. It's going to take up all your time. You're not going to have a social life unless you just have to have it more than anything else. That's the only reason you should pursue it. And in many ways, many of the paths of Tantra are the same way.
Absolutely. I mean, and realistically, it makes sense to me that if you want to understand the actual nature of reality, which entails being it,
Right.
that you have to sacrifice, that you're going to have to embark on a path where you're going to end up nullified.
Exactly. Yeah. And one of the unique things that this brings us up to is this concept of, which I discuss in the book, Achinta Beta Beta Vada, or simultaneous unity and difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's different lineages that have different concepts of that, and this idea of does the person just dissolve into nothingness, or do they sustain some level of consciousness? And of course, different traditions that I've or participate in or involved with have unique perspectives on that. But even that's a unique thing about Tantra is Tantra is seeking to distill down the essence of a person so that there is some semblance of memory left when the person leaves this human body.
Absolutely.
And that's a very important concept, which is not talked about a lot, is that, most levels of awareness when the person leaves the body through the doorway of death, they're basically, we talk about in Vedic studies, and I talk about in the book, there's the Devayana, or the pathway to the gods, and there's the Pitrayana, which is the pathway to the ancestors of the moon. And the Upanishads would always talk about the Pitrayana, or the path to the moon, was just like kind of like a cosmic recycling factory.
That's right. Yeah, the ancient Greeks had the same idea. Exact same thing.
Yeah. So that's something that, it's like, okay, you're going to just be recycled, and you'll get to try again. And guess what? When you try it again, you're not even going to remember that you started again. So it's like a cruel joke. And I think that's where a lot of people, they see samsara and they say, well, this is a cruel joke. I want out of this. I'll stop this ride. I want to get off. And so there is a perspective of that. But from the tantric perspective, it says, okay, I can tell you how to get off. Learn to be a human. Stop trying to escape this. Embrace it and truly experience it in its essence. And then that's another more radical, rapid doorway. But it's like what we were discussing. It's also very tricky. It's also challenging.
On some level, it involves completely altering your perspective from one of subject in a world of objects to a much more holistic perspective. But that you can't do that in a mental, intellectual way. It's just, that's not it.
Right.
And that's really what your book is, I think, really shows me and shows anyone who reads it.
I appreciate that. And that was actually another goal in my book, because I remember thinking and that exact concept. And I thought, how can I express the essence of Nisargadatta, but also express the essence of the Vaishnava traditions, who would talk about, to try to intellectualize this as blasphemy. And so that they would be, so you have these two radically different viewpoints, right? You had one more contemporary, like Nisargadatta, which would get lumped into Advaita Vedanta, but then you had Vaishnava, Tantric cult, who would say, to understand the amorous play of Sri Krishna and Radha in Vrindavana, the only key to that doorway is through pure bhakti and through pure love. Jnana yoga, or intellectual yoga, will not only keep you out, but it will ban you from that dimension. Right. And so these are riddles, right? These are riddles. So I was like, okay, they're saying the same thing. And exactly. So I thought about that. Yeah, they're saying the same exact thing. And so how can I give someone a glimpse of this? And so that was my hope. And we're human and we fail in our efforts to do these things, but we try very hard to do this, to express that. And so I often feel that poetry can express that. So that's why there's a lot of poetry in the text as well.
Oh, absolutely. I think poetry is perhaps the ultimate expression in word of wisdom.
I agree. And a poetic vision of reality is what the the Vedas were trying to express, and the Upanishads as well too. And they were trying to express that poetic view of reality. And to understand that, one has to start to, read 4 to 5 different levels in every experience. And that's very hard from someone who lives in a reductionist, only Newtonian perception of reality.
Oh, I mean, yeah, just the way our minds work, I think we're kind of locked into a specific perspective that's very materialistic and nihilistic, and it takes tremendous work and tremendous blessing for us to allow any deviation from that.
That's an incredibly important point. I 100% agree, because our entire culture is set up to kind of stop what we're talking about, and in some ways obviously, but in some ways unconsciously. But it doesn't matter whether it's consciously or unconscious; it still exists. And so, that's where we could, where we have to kind of, there's a certain battle. That's where I often, say these things like, arise, Arjuna. Or that's where we can talk about these concepts. The Bhagavad Gita. There is a battle on some levels for our perspective of reality. Each human has this.
Oh yeah.
Each human has this, and so that we have to participate. You can't be a bystander.
No, there's no. This is in many ways. I mean, I know the analogy is again crude. I'm a crude man. But it's like a prison. Like you have to either be a warrior or you're going to end up a victim, and you just have to make a choice.
Yeah. And I think that, I don't think that's actually a crude description at all. I think it's a very accurate description, and it's a very frightening description. And to be honest with you, I even intimated some of those ideas in Entering the Desert. For people to consider about that. What does it mean in that perspective? Is that we have to make a choice when that, and it doesn't necessarily mean that, one choice is the better choice. I think, what we're talking about is that sometimes that choice to be the warrior, to be the fighter, is very hard. It's very dangerous.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah. And so to do that that's one thing, but from another perspective, then that's the best thing we can ever hope for, is to have that. And
yeah, because if we intend to obtain wisdom, that means inherently prior to that, we have to recognize that we have inherent nobility, and inherent nobility is not going to cower in the corner. It's going to stand up and fight. Right.
Exactly. And I think we see that in today's contemporary landscape, is that although we have this world which prides itself in what they call the pseudo-individualism, we're actually seeing the exact opposite. We're seeing a complete leveling of kind of like a monoculture.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that is because of the fear of what it really means to be an individual. Obviously some very mundane fear that if someone just has a viewpoint that's unique or a perspective that's unique, then they will be unpopular. That's one level. But there's also it's a deeper aspect on an unconscious or subconscious level, because it demands them to stand up and confront their own personal karma. There was a very unique, because I grew up as a child reading ISKCON books, because as a child, I was born in 1970. So I grew up in the height of the Hare Krishna movement. And so those books were just everywhere. And so they were so beautiful and so strange and mysterious. And so I never became involved with that, but I had all the books and I would read them. And that was a beautiful kind of doorway into my experience of becoming a Hindu. But I remember one discussion of Prabhupada, and he said, the reason why people like to think of Brahman as this big ocean of nothingness instead of a personality-based deity is because if it's nothingness, they never have to confront the reality of who they are.
That's right.
They can just die and dissolve into nothingness. They never have to do anything. But he was saying, but no, the supreme personality of Godhead is going to demand that you be who you are. and that to do that requires a lot of courage, discipline. And so I always thought that was kind of fascinating. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with it, but it's an interesting perspective of what we're talking about.
I think that there's a direct correlation between that, what you just said, and people's reluctance to, I even admit that a guru might be necessary, because many people would rather like Christ is my savior, right?
Yes.
But a living guru is the only one who can get in your face and like get down in your business and kick ass and take names and make you sweat and put you on the spot. And that's an entirely different thing.
Yeah, it's totally different. It's like, Christ is really cool until he's telling you to abandon your family and follow him. And it's like, whoa, that's not what I thought it was going to ask me to do. So that's the difference between being, a bystander, or what I sometimes call a tourist, a spiritual tourist, or is someone going to be a traveler or a pilgrim on that path. They have to pursue that. They have to make a commitment of some point of that.
Certainly.
Everyone has their level of what commitment they're willing to make. That's what prarabdha karma is, right? There's different levels of karma. Our prarabdha karma is whatever individual kind of extraction of karma we have in this lifetime, and that's very unique for everyone. So some people are more willing to make a deeper commitment than others, and that's fine. But everyone still has a chance to evaluate that, right?
Certainly.
To think about these things, to talk about these things, and to think about what that might really mean. And that's what it means when we're talking about people asking about a guru. It's like many times, like some of the kung fu teachers I've studied with that have just been just complete maniacs. The highest level teachers, and oftentimes people are like, oh, that must be so great to be studying with that person. They have no clue what that means.
No.
It's like, I often refer to it as like a radiation. It's like you're going to be exposed to this radiation, and that radiation is dangerous. And so some people can take it or not. Some people can't.
That's right.
It's like, what are they going to do? And so many times than not, they'll say, should I study with this teacher? I'm like, no, absolutely do not study with that teacher. Why you have? I'm like, it's different, and it's not saying that, and that's the problem, is when we talk about these things, people can say, oh, they're saying they're better, they're stronger, they're cooler, they're whatever. And that's actually the exact opposite of what we're saying. But these are kind of concepts that I think are important to discuss and bring up when people are talking about, like, should I find a guru? Can I find a guru? All those kind of things.
I feel like, to me, no one should even think about a guru unless you've somehow mastered like other areas of your life where you can be successful, be responsible, communicate effectively, take care of all worldly matters, and are completely 100% devoted and in search of the divine. And then possibly you could go find a guru and actually make it work.
And that was how the traditional stages of life were set up in India. There was that's how it was set up. And of course, some people were on different spectrums on those stages, but you're 100% accurate. That's not a wild concept. And we see that mirrored, and even in some of the Western esoteric traditions, where various practitioners would say, I recommend this many years of therapy before you go into occult practices. I recommend this before I go into these deeper occult practices. That's just completely forgotten today.
It is, unfortunately, but it's so beneficial, because only when you have been able to do those things, or do the potential for like greater spiritual realization open up, which seems maybe counterintuitive. I don't know, but just that's how it works.
Yeah. And I will say this, another deeper kind of current that runs through my book is my deep in of the teachings of Sri Aurobindo. And Sri Aurobindo was adamant that the evolution of humanity was going to come via the incarnated body, not by transcending it, but by a literal transformation of the human species. Like a literal cellular transformation of the human species would occur. That was the fundamental teaching of the Aurobindo system. That was always a huge influence on me. Definitely an Aurobindo devotee. So always thought was like, you couldn't express Tantra even any better than that, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's beautiful.
And so that's what I think that we're talking about here too. Is like there is really no escape. There might be an escape from a limited, myopic human experience.
Definitely.
The escape, we want to escape that. Like you said, we want to escape that type of prison. But once we leave, it's not into some magical land. It's even to be more human.
Exactly.
To feel more.
To become more embodied, more enworlded.
Right. Exactly.
I think we're coming probably to the end of our time here this evening. Really been amazing to speak with you. Again, I feel like every time we talk, the time passes too quickly and so much passes between us, and I come away with it like it's just such a blessing. So I want to thank you again. And if you have any, final thoughts, or just want to let people know where they can find you online, or how to get the book, or any upcoming projects.
No, it's my honor to be on I'm always cherish our conversations, and this has been a very inspiring conversation for me as well. I'm always honored by the feedback. The feedback on the new book is overwhelming. They can definitely find Tantric Physics Volume 1 and 2 via Anathema Publishing. If they're in Europe, that they can get it through the Cyclic Law distributor. And then they can also go on my blog, Transmissions from the Kali Yuga. I continuously write both poetry and just kind of philosophical expressions on that. And then my deepest hope is that people find that Tantric physics is inspiring to them and to their own practices, and that it helps them deepen their own perspective, whether it's a Hindu Tantra or a Buddhist Tantra, or if they're practitioners of Western esotericism, and they can maybe find something of that. I hope it inspires them as well.
Thank you so much. I mean, and just as a final thought, I agree. I think anyone whether they're an esoteric practitioner, regardless of the tradition, or even just interested in esotericism and not a practitioner, your book is tremendously beneficial from many different perspectives, not the least of which is giving people somewhat of a taste of a really beautiful esoteric tantric exposition, with full explanation in terms of like various aspects of practice and view. It's just amazing. I mean, I'd recommend it to anybody, regardless of their interest level. And I think, because everyone's different, they're going to come away with different insights from it. But I feel like, again, this is really the best book I've read on the subject. And I'm really proud to, know you, and to be able to speak with you about it is really wonderful.
I'm humbled by your words, and I'm honored by your words, particularly as coming from a practitioner yourself. And so I'm grateful and thankful for that. And that's my deepest hope, is that this book will just inspire people to get a taste of Tantra and to maybe pursue their own personal studies with a guru or a teacher of their choice, and that it kind of in some way contributes to their own path of self-realization. That's the best I could hope for.
Certainly. Thank you again, Craig. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so much, Craig.
In the second half of the interview, in the Chamber of Reflection, Craig and I continued to discuss Tantric physics, diving very, very deeply into an exploration of gnosis, birth and death, and much more. In all my years of recording this podcast, few interviews have resulted in a more in-depth analysis and discussion that goes straight to the heart. You do not want to miss this crucial conversation on the very nature and purpose of esoteric practice. I'd like to remind you that although you're able to listen to this podcast at no charge, it costs time and money to create. We ask you to support our efforts and the creation of future podcasts by joining the membership section at chamberofreflection.com or subscribing via Patreon at patreon.com/occultofpersonality. And if you're already supporting the show or have done so in the past, my heartfelt thanks, and I salute you.
Diana, regina della selva, sangue sulle foglie, zoccoli che battono il terreno nella notte. Tu che sei freccia che colpisce, prede e predatrice. Diana delle profonde oscurità e delle altezze luminose, riflesso della luna sulle acque, fuoco nascosto nelle profondità. Tu che sei il vuoto che partorisce le stelle, l'infinitamente grande e l'infinitamente piccolo. Diana Tridia, signora dei confini, lama del coltello, soglia del cambiamento. Tu che mi attendi ad ogni incrocio e celi la chiave dei misteri. Vieni a me sulle ali del vento.